Hi, and welcome back to part 3 of our study of the Anglo Saxon poem Beowulf. I hope you're all taking care of yourselves and being kind to the people you live with. I know it can be really tough self-isolating, and living sort of under the feet of those people around you with no breaks from them is really tough. But it's something we're all experiencing at the moment, so it's becoming a universal experience. So all I'm going to say is try to cut the people around you a bit of slack. And if you've got anything you'd like me to address in a video, let me know below, and maybe I can do a bit of an agony aunt thing for you. Like, personally, I am deeply concerned about the state of my eyebrows and how much worse they're going to look at the end of this quarantine period. Should I try and do them myself? Probably not, but I'm sure you guys have more pressing concerns than that. But to be honest, I'm even willing to talk to you about the small ones too. Anyway, we'll get right into the learning now, since we know we're all here to learn about Beowulf. Now, it's no overstatement to say that Beowulf is, today at the very least, one of the most important surviving works of medieval literature. And it's by far the longest. It's the longest Old English poem. At just over 3,000 lines, it preserves about 1/10 of the surviving Old English verse that we know from before the Norman conquest, which is when English turned into Middle English. But it's also still a bit of a mystery. There's a lot about Beowulf that we don't know. We don't know who composed it. We don't know why they composed it. We're not entirely even sure of the time frame in which it was composed. And although Beowulf is a legend rather than a morality tale, it also serves a purpose of moral instruction. So today, it can tell us quite a lot about what the values were that were important to Anglo-Saxon people. And the poem illustrates kind of 3 of the most important morals of its time, which were bravery, honour, and loyalty. So what do you think the purpose of Beowulf was? Why was this story actually told? So last we left our heroes, Beowulf had defeated Grendel, and he's emerged from his very first fight as a bona fide hero. So he and his men have been rewarded by King Hrothgar with weapons, with treasure, and for Beowulf, he's made a promise that he is going to become Hrothgar's son. He's going to be in line with his own sons for the throne. And celebrations of what Beowulf has done, they continue well into the night following Grendel's death. There's feasting, there's drinking, there's praising of Beowulf. And Unferth, I don't know if you remember Unferth, he was the guy who in the first part of the story challenged Beowulf when he showed up by saying, well, you couldn't win that swimming contest, could you? He stays very quiet because he's kind of got egg on his face for suggesting that Beowulf couldn't defeat Grendel, because he did defeat Grendel. Anyway, people eventually settle down to sleep. And they still keep their war gear with them, because if you remember, when they sleep out of routine, they believe that they need to keep their weaponry and their shields with them in case they die in their sleep, and the reason for that was in order to be able to go to Valhalla. But we're only a third of the way into the poem, and Grendel was only the start of Beowulf's troubles. In fact, this very night, the very night after Grendel limps back to his lair minus his arm to die in peace, the Danes are going to be attacked once more. Okay, so it's not all over yet. And this time, it's going to be someone looking for vengeance. So at this point in the story, it is revealed that Grendel has a mother, who in Seamus Heaney's translation of this poem is described as a monstrous hell bride. Okay, it's a lovely way to describe someone. And he described her as a monstrous hell bride to remind us of how all these monstrous swamp creatures can be traced back to Cain, who in the Bible was supposed to be the first murderer. And we learn that Grendel, he returned to his den that night where he died and his mother found him, and now she's so overcome with grief and anger that she wants revenge. So, Grendel's mother, she avenges her son by intending to attack Heorot, the mead hall, at night. And what she does is she kills and kidnaps Hrothgar's friend Aesha and takes with her back to her swamp the trophy hung on the wall, which was her son's dismembered arm. Now, unlike Grendel, his mother's motivation seems kind of retaliatory. So she's not doing it for the fun, she's not interested in murder and violence, she just wants to make those Danes pay for what they did to her son. And on her way back home, she leaves a really clear trail of blood behind her. So she leaves this trail of blood all the way back to her lake, and she marks the spot of where to enter the lake for Hrothgar and Beowulf by leaving Aesir's severed head behind, which is really, really kind of gross. So, her intention is that she's luring Beowulf into the lake, where she hopes to have her final revenge against him. And when Beowulf, Hrothgar and the rest of their party reach the water, what they actually find is that the water is boiling with blood. Okay, it's also filled with sea serpents and lots of other demons, and the water burns on top of the water, so it seems very unworldly. Now, Unferth, the guy who is by this point feeling a bit embarrassed for slacking off Beowulf earlier, he decides that he's going to give Beowulf his favourite sword. The sword is called Hrunting. And with this sword, Beowulf is more than up to the challenge. So he takes the sword, he jumps right into this boiling water, and when he reaches the bottom of the lake 24 hours later, side note, those are some strong lungs that Beowulf has, we know that a demon tries to attack him, but he's totally unsuccessful since he's killed almost instantly. And then Grendel's mother emerges and tries to grab Beowulf on sight, but she can't scratch his armour, so instead what she decides to do is she seizes Beowulf and takes him with her to her underwater cave, which by the time they get into the cave it turns out actually has oxygen, so that's quite easy for him to fight in there. And as she's carrying him back, hordes of monsters tear at his armour and try to attack him, but Beowulf manages to fend them all off. So once in her cave, Beowulf tries to stab Grendel's mother with Hrunting, but the sword can't cut through her thick skin. And so Beowulf and Grendel's mother end up kind of grappling with each other doing battle. And eventually, Grendel's mother seizes a knife and tries to stab Beowulf in his heart, but he is protected by this amazing armour that's been given to him by Hrothgar's wife. And Beowulf, quite luckily, sees another sword on the floor, which is an ancient weapon from the time of giants. It's massive. And of course, Beowulf is the only man mighty enough to wield this sword. And he swings this blade at the head of Grendel's mother and he decapitates her. Now, again, it's quite horrible. The death of Grendel's mother is probably one of the most violent parts of the poem. And I think we can say about Grendel's mother that unlike Beowulf, who's seeking glory, Grendel's mother is only seeking vengeance for her child. So after Beowulf kills her, he notices that Grendel's body is there too, where she was obviously grieving over him. And he uses this giant sword to also decapitate Grendel's corpse, and he brings the head with him back to Heorot as a trophy. Now, that is the end of part 2 of Beowulf. And what I'd like to do is just go on to discuss Grendel's mother in a little bit of detail. So the figure of Grendel's mother is a little bit of a paradox because she's described in the story as both weaker and stronger than her son. So when she's introduced in the text, it explains that she's got this fearsome womanly strength, indicating that a physically strong woman is to be feared. But it also claims that she's not as strong as her son, Grendel. And during her revenge attack in Heorot, the thing she fails to do is stand and fight the Danes, who had been easy pickings for her son. But instead of staying to fight them, she kidnaps and kills Hrothgar's friend Aesir, and she runs away with him. Now, some people think that indicates weakness, but I think perhaps it indicates intelligence. You know, staying to fight a million people is not always the smartest thing to do. But despite running from that initial fight, when Beowulf shows up in her underwater home, she faces him. She faces him fiercely, she faces him aggressively, and she drags him by force to her hall under the sea, under the water, where she immediately overpowers him. Now, Beowulf is described as the strongest man alive, but he is unable to defeat Grendel's mother using his strength alone. And And his strength alone is what defeated Grendel. If you remember, he said, I'm going to defeat him not using armour because that's what's honourable. But what happens is that Beowulf, by luck, stumbles upon this giant sword, which is the only thing able to kill her. So there's this dueling narrative here. Is Grendel's mother stronger or weaker than her son? Is she stronger or weaker than Beowulf? Does the idea of a powerful woman being described as weak tell us anything about Anglo Saxon ideas of womanhood? Is Grendel's mother actually incredibly savvy and smart to avoid fighting masses of people in Heorot, but instead fighting the strongest one in her own home territory? I mean, I think that is smart. I don't know, what do you think? Another question I have here is, does Grendel's mother adhere to the idea of the Anglo-Saxon hero? You could argue that she does. In Anglo-Saxon culture, fighting was a way of life. People preferred war to peace because it was seen as honourable, and blood feuds were actually kind of fashionable. It would have been weirder if she hadn't avenged the death of her son. If she hadn't avenged Grendel's death, she would have been considered a disgrace. We know that Grendel attacked Heorot night after night for no real reason, so he absolutely fits the bill of a villain. But for Grendel's mum, she usually just stayed at home in her swamp having a nice time keeping to herself. But upon the death of her son, she became a warrior. When the time came, she followed the Anglo-Saxon hero tradition of aiming to kill the person who killed her only son. And since Anglo-Saxon heroes were 100% male, women were always considered weak. But I don't really think that Grendel's mother sounds weak. Even outside of Beowulf, there aren't actually any instances of Old English literature featuring women proving their prowess. Grendel's mother, who I might add isn't even given the acknowledgement or luxury of her own name in this poem, she proves her mettle, she proves her strength, she proves that she has strategy, she proves that she has intelligence in her fight against Beowulf. But she probably wasn't intended to be read as a powerful figure by the Anglo-Saxons. But I would argue that Grendel's mother probably proves herself to be more heroic than Beowulf himself. Now we know that the pagans often told stories featuring monsters simply doing what monsters do. But with Grendel's mother, it's not as black and white as that. We have got an example of a grieving monster, a grieving mother seeking revenge, which is really rare for the time because she has been provided with what's actually a very human motivation. She wants to avenge her son, she sheds the blood of very few people in order to do that, and in battle against Beowulf, she shows her wit and intelligence. She lures him into a place where she feels comfortable, where she feels safe that she can win in the battle against him. And if it weren't for sheer luck on Beowulf's part, she probably would have won. He had strong armour, which meant that she couldn't stab him in the heart, and the sudden find of a giant sword, the only thing that could defeat Grendel's mother, she would have won if not for that. Furthermore, is Grendel's mother actually as wicked as her son? Can we justify her actions in taking vengeance? Is there anything about Grendel's mother that we could almost describe as human? Okay everyone, I hope you found today's lesson interesting. Please keep making requests for videos, and if you like, share them with your friends. And like I mentioned earlier, if you'd like to anonymously submit a question for me to answer, I would be more than happy to start making some agony aunt videos giving advice for you. So for now, stay cute, be kind, and please subscribe.